I'm Dean.
Nice to meet you. Very nice to meet you,
Very
actually.
good to meet you. I feel like we have so much in common.
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
So a little bit about me. I'm a troublemaker.
Okay, that's a good start.
I hear that you're pretty much a troublemaker too, but
I
maybe a little bit
try.
more diplomatic than me.
Maybe. I'm not sure. In my previous positions, I may have not been that diplomatic.
Okay.
So it's been hard to actually tell people I've changed a little bit to open the doors. But yeah, I've been an environmental justice activist for most of my life. And I've been an activist since I was about 12.
What?
Yeah.
I feel like I've also been an activist since I was 12. I definitely had, growing up white in apartheid South Africa, very alone. Like all the people around me, I couldn't trust adults. So I also like grew up hard, and I worked very hard for a long time.
Yeah. No, it is. I think there's a good thing to activism, but there's also this part that it makes you quite like hard. And you almost come across as unsympathetic when you're running a campaign, because that the focus is the goal. And you have to remind yourself that the people are part of that goal. And I have learned, it's been a journey of being called hard and cold and all of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, I find that I'm still quite hard on like institutions, but I try to be softer on people. I think a lot of the work that I've done, like I realized that you need people, like first of all to make it happen. So like you could call it like a Machiavellian strategic sense that you need people. So you need to like care for people and be a little bit more compassionate. But I think we also like don't understand like how hard it is for other people, even in those like terrible institutions that make life difficult for us. But I think with a lot of my work, I try to make a soft space for hard questions.
That's very nice, because I think one of the things I learned, there was an activist and we were at a protest, and it was against xenophobia, and it was like a lot of, I think it was the first anti-xenophobia marches we were having, and lots of anger and there was lots of stress. And he went up to speak, and then he said, we have to remember something. I'm not going to say, Amandla, power to, I'm going to say, we have to love each other. And I thought, what is this guy on about? But it's true that you can't get your message across of the hard things without also the soft part. In fact, I think it was Che Guevara who said something about be strong, but remain sensitive.
And my favorite is Bell Hooks, there is no justice without love.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are like framing statements about, I think also a lot of the work that I do is informed by radical black existential philosophies, and these are the things that like constantly remind me that to be human is to remember that other people are human. I guess it's like, we could talk about Ubuntu, Tumut, the steadfastness.
Yes.
Philosophies of resistance, but that we're engaged in a kind of a constant battle for justice, but we can only do it from a loving space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you'll get exhausted. Because then you're just literally running against a brick wall, and then you think, what am I doing? And if you don't do what you're saying with love, you don't penetrate that wall. And that's taken years of running into the wall.
Me too. I one of the things that happened with the work that I've been doing in the process is really learning to not get in my own way, because that hardness also like prevents you from like connecting.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we can like continue on that vein for ages. But tell me a little bit more about the work that you're doing.
So I've been an environmental justice activist for a long time, and presently I'm working on water and environmental issues. and I work with an organization called WaterCan. So it's an initiative of the organization Undoing Tax Abuse. And literally, we're trying to create awareness around water and water quality, water access, because that's another issue we should discuss in terms of, access. And the kind of challenges we're facing right now in terms of infrastructure collapse, actually.
How did WaterCan start?
It's a very funny story, actually, because what was happening is that the Department of Water and Sanitation for about 10 years was also captured. It was one of the captured departments. So that's why you have the Lesotho Highlands project phase 2 that's delayed because of what was going on then. But then also just the deterioration of services, deterioration in the department. And there's this thing called the blue drop and green drop and no drop reports that government is supposed to come out with every year. So there was this previous minister, Mokonyane, basically said, no, we're not releasing them anymore in 2013. So there was like about 9 years at the time when these reports were not coming out, and we had no idea to establish what is the state of our water. So INTRA was thinking that let's get people to test. Let's get people across the country to tell us about their water, and we'll create a report done by people.
Oh, wow.
So, and it just so happened that I was on the board at the time and I was finishing my PhD, and my PhD was exactly that, was how do we build citizen science activism for water justice and environmental justice in South Africa. And they kind of just, the conversations were like this. It was like just a general conversation. I was like, oh, but I'm doing that. And this is what I'm finding. And they were like, right, let's do it for real. And it was almost bizarre because 9 out of 10 times when you do your PhD, it's theoretical, it's on a shelf, it's 3 people have read it, it's done. But they were giving me an opportunity to bring it to life. And that for me was just, I couldn't believe that that was happening. That I could actually do what I was writing about for all those years, to do it practically.
Wow.
And that's how WaterCan came about.
That's so amazing. I really love that. Also, for me, let's also connect to who are we as citizens. I think that one of the things we have this negotiated settlement, democracy, the Rainbow Nation, and then we hand over all of our power that where we created the change and citizens, we hand it over to government.
Yeah. We had too much hope. No, I think that's the problem, is that, well, post-94, a lot of activists went into government, and the people who were active on the ground had all moved into institutions or government, and there was this kind of, well, they'll provide, and it didn't work out. And now we've got to turn that around. We have a lot of work to do for people to realize that democracy is literally in your hands.
Yeah, because I think what happened is that people think that they can vote every 5 years. It's 5 years, right?
It is
5 years. I'm just remembering.
Yeah.
Because I also you can that your role is just to vote, and then you can leave it all over to the nanny state, and everybody's going to provide for you. Yeah. But that what happened is that with the shadow of capitalism, these people get captured because everybody wants to live well, everybody wants to live in abundance, and then we get too comfortable, we get too alienated from our true source of living with people. We start living in bigger and bigger houses, higher and higher walls, and we're no longer connected as human beings. And we forget, and we forget all the things that made the change to democracy, the street committees, citizen activism just stopped happening because now we're too busy living high on the hog, because this is what we're all promised a good life.
Yeah. So exactly, and I think it coincides as well with the kind of the growth of neoliberalism and capitalism, because the whole idea of that is this false sense of democracy. So you take decision making and control away from people. And it's something that has happened over decades. It's what happened with science. So that's why I was so fascinated. I really wanted to do citizen science, is because the first scientists weren't scientists. They were people doing stuff, and of course they were, and also the type of scientists we know about is a very specific scientist. So we know Newton, Isaac Newton, and all the normal types. But what about the Arab scientists, the Japanese scientists? And I did reading where they were using science, you know, to fight struggles already then, in those ancient years. So there was a power to that. But with industrialization, there was this divide between the scientist and people. So it was like, even till today, when you talk about science, it's not something that's accessible to people. So I was doing, I was doing interviews, and I asked this young woman, I said to her, what do you think about science? Because I was doing my fieldwork, and she was like, no, I know nothing about science. I think you got the wrong person. She was ready to leave the interview. And I said to her, hang on, forget it. The interview is not just about that question. Tell me what you do. She said she's a farmer. And I said, so what does that mean? And she said, no, I prepare the land. And so I said, how do you do that? And she explained how she does it. Now she's telling me that. She's like, you know what? You know a straw, but a big one? You put it in the ground, in the four corners and in the center. And then you take the soil out and you put it in a 2-liter bottle of, a 2-liter cold drink bottle, and you fill it with water. And you do that everywhere and you let it settle. And then when it settles, you can see the different types of soil. And you can see loamy and you can see clay. And I'm looking at her. I'm like, all of this is very science. And then she said, and then you'll know what to plant. Because you'll know if this is clay, then you can plant this. If it's this kind of soil, you can plant that. So I said to her, everything you just said is science. But because of the control over science, ordinary people doubt themselves. And it's exactly the kind of thing, whether it's artists, whether it's scientists, whether it's activists, because there's this kind of force that makes us doubt. And that doubt then makes it say, let's give over control and power to people who know. So it comes to that, what you were saying.
And it's also the thing, like, I think we once had a conversation where you said, I'm not creative, I'm not an artist, all that stuff, you know? Yeah. And it's the same thing, that this divide between the gatekeepers of culture say that, and we get educated out of a creativity, as they've done research, that all children, like 93% of children are genius level, like from 3 to 7 years old. And every year afterwards, you see the intelligence, so-called, like dropping, because they're educated out of the confidence in their own thought process and to create workers.
No, it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just, if I think of kids I've known from little to adulthood, you see that confidence, something happens in life that breaks it down. It's very sad.
Yeah, I think it definitely in the education process. I think of, I'm very inspired by the work of Paulo Freire, you know, pedagogy of the oppressed, and also like understanding in particular cultural power and cultural violence.
Yeah.
That changes the way that people think about themselves.
Right.
So a lot of the work that I do is to activate like the people's thought processes of how they engage in the space, how they're changing. So you're making work that changes the space, that either disrupts it or it brings people and makes people conspirators. So one of the work this work that I'm doing here, I got very ill after all the work that I was doing. I had a lot of very negative attention on me. I had a lot of death threats, in particular the work around fuck white people.
Oh, wow.
So I made this work that caused a reaction. First I wore a suit. I wore it on my body because also it's very important that people understood that this was a white person saying it. But people got very confused about whether or not I was white. They like really wanted there's this narrative that it can only be like certain bodies that can have a problem with whiteness.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
So then once I was wearing that on my body, then my body became this like target of, first of all, like transphobia, fat phobia, like people couldn't understand my gender. So that it called to like a bigger sphere of like both attention and violence.
Wow.
So all of that like became like situated on my body.
Yeah.
And then because of the attention that I was getting, I kind of withdrew from the world because I needed to find like safer spaces for me to, because I was like, when I was living in Cape Town doing my master's, because it's like a tiny bubble, I became so hyper visible.
Really?
Yeah, it was so hard, and I would go out to a restaurant with a friend, and there'd be somebody that would recognize me like at the bar, and they would like do a potty. They would try to like get a potty, like come and like attack me or something. So I just stopped like going out in public. It only took like I had to move back to Joburg because of the violence. Also like the way that Cape Town itself holds colonial violence. And so like when you fight against the colonial authorities,
Yes.
you know, you become like the kind of locus of the violence. So one of the things that happened with me is that my metabolism stopped working, and I just held on to every bit of trauma.
Sure.
You know, so like everything I put into my body wouldn't convert to energy, and it just stayed on my body. So I got bigger and bigger and more immobile, and it felt like my body was turning to stone. So it took a really long time, and I just like drew further and further from the world, but I kept reading, I kept loving, I kept like finding ways to transmute the violence that I was experiencing. And then I had this like realization also, like I was also like making a lot of work painting at home, like doing a lot of this kind of textual meditation work, learning how to breathe. Oh my God, learning how to breathe, like going to a doctor who taught me how to breathe at the first point of healing.
Wow.
Yeah, like learning how to process the energy that comes in. Like we constantly processing energy, and if we can learn how to breathe, like we can really activate. So from that process, I learned how. I became more and more interested in working with natural processes, and like returning. Like I also think that one of the things that we've forgotten, that humans are nature, that we are a part of nature.
We're part of it. Often when people talk about us and environment, we're part of it.
Yeah, and like we share more DNA with trees than most living creatures, you know. So to understand that we're also a part of this network, that when we engaging, like we're not just engaging as like separate bodies. Yeah. We're part of the communication that's happening with trees.
And understanding without that, we won't be able to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. Because also like the conditions that make life possible on this planet are very rare in the entire universe. And what we're doing as human beings, with the extraordinary power that we have over the environment that exists outside of us, is that we are ruining nature, and that we are also like really highly affecting, like from the level of both like physical, but also like an incredible soul loss that is happening.
I agree. I think so. I think that sums it up so nicely. But tell me about, I'm very curious. I mean, okay, like I realize now when you're telling me, I read about you, and that whole having that spotlight on, you know, there's so many people who want to be in the spotlight, but it's not an easy thing, right? I mean, I don't know, but
no, I'm sure you have that. I'm sure you have parts of that. Maybe I think it's the observer effect, right? It's quantum. So when you have the observer on you, you change. Yeah. And you know, it's science. It's science. You're collapsing the wave, you know, into the particle. And when you're that particle that exists like in the locus of attention, it is.
But also the fact that people think they have a right to kind of come and confront you as a like, and the bullying. I mean, that's something that social media has really, you know, like it does make you conscious of who you are all the time. You know, it's like if you just think about before social media, everybody has their, you know, I have curly hair and I want straight hair, whatever. Everyone has their thing, but it's so like it's well balanced. But if you get people shouting at you for who you are,
yeah, and then
all
like
the time,
it's I wanna like, part of me think that it like ruined my life, but what it also did was make me more resolved in my purpose, like to understand that I can project into the world and infect it. So like to use my power with great responsibility.
yeah,
Like
that's good.
Yeah, and to understand that we all have privilege, but it's not about handing it over, because you can't just hand over your privilege as if it's like second-hand jersey. You know,
Would have been a good one, right?
it would have been a wonderful.
Lots of little shops. Get some privilege.
Yeah, the charity shop. Here, come and get your privilege. You know, to understand that we have to do something with power, and to also understand that is a natural consequence of being a part of a moving universe that's constantly growing, and like we're understanding more and more. We're making things a little bit more open, understanding.
So, you know, you mentioned my creativity, whatever, but I do think it's a real thing. I mean, okay, you know, you can bring it out, and I'm sure you have the ability as a person who works in that creative zone. But I always admire people like you said, who can take whatever you're feeling, your energy, and make that, you know, or produce something that takes out your story. I mean, like, that's fascinating. Tell me about it.
So I think for me, like, I've thought about it quite a lot, because it's not me. It ain't me, but it's not me. I feel like I'm a channel for, like, I think that inspiration, creativity, these are parts of creation. Like, what I'm doing more creative than a bird building a nest and pulling it apart if it's not good enough.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, I think that these are like natural consequences of all living things. A rock erodes, a tree waves in the wind, they keep their branches away from each other, the crown shineth. These are things, a mushroom decomposes dead things, tells and feeds information from space to space to space in the mycelial network.
Yeah.
These are creative processes. We are all constantly creating. We're creating our reality. And so when you remember who you are, you can only let that energy flow through you and into the world. Like, it's just, yes, it takes courage to like admit like things about yourself and then project it into the world. But we all need courage. Like it's like, these are the things, like, we're only scared when we think that it's going to be bad consequences. But when you let go of consequences as bad, and they just like the end results or a part of the process, it becomes a lot easier to like, okay, this is an experiment. There's no good or bad experiment.
Yeah.
You know?
Bad
Yeah.
You were saying we're educated by fear, or we...
Yeah, so we taught to fear failure. We're taught that like a certain thing is success. So one of the things I read was the queer art of failure, which like reframes what failure is. Failure is the inability to meet the demands of capitalism. And when we let go of that, like, how can anything be a failure? Because anything is just a result of the grand experiment of life. Some things work, some things don't work. you can change the framework of what you think is failure or success. And that is another manifestation of this like very personal power that we have, each like creative beings. We are all creative beings.
I think so. I think it's different types of creativity. So as an activist, I think that I can be creative about a campaign. You know, how do I create awareness about this water that's mucky? I can put it in bottles. Do you know what we did for Valentine's Day, by the way?
Oh, tell me.
Just talking about creativity. We took dirty water and dead flowers, and we gave it to 4 mayors as Valentine's Day gifts. But we had this poem, a breakup poem for Valentine's Day, saying you've destroyed the environment, so we like breaking up with you kind of thing. And we handed it over. Of course, there was no response, but it was a creative campaign. So creative, you're right. It's the different types of creativity that comes out. But I do think, and I think you're right, is that 2 things. The fear issue of, it's funny because what you said now, a lot of corporates tell their people, like it's okay to fail. And you know, that's how we've grown and how we've become CEOs. I had 5 businesses before this. And now look at me. So it's making fear okay, but it's still quantifying success. And that's still the hard part, is to break out of that and to say what you're saying, is that it should not be in the narrative of kind of like a commodification of what you're doing, of your passion, because then it's falling into that trap again. But it can be quite, I think, a challenge. I think a lot of young people, I don't know whether it's the schooling, whether it's just society, it's social media, like being perfect all the time. That fear of failing is even worse than ever. I mean, I just sense it, that there's this need to be perfectly groomed, say the perfect thing, get the perfect numbers on Insta or whatever. That is so much pressure.
Also, like the education system, like relies on, you have to have exams. You need like the banking form of education. So like, I invest this knowledge in you, and then you invest it in there. Blah blah. The whole like bullshit, like financial, economic objectivity. Like we invest all of our success into objects, and it's like also like, so the thing is that, for me also as an artist, yes, you're making objects at time. But for me, like what I'm doing is I'm involved in a process. And the process is the interesting thing for me. The experimentation, does this work, does this not work? Is this beautiful? Is this ugly? These are like processes. And then once I'm finished with what I'm making, and it's not like, also art isn't just about making things.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, once I'm like, say I am making an object, once I finish with that, it's almost like it's over for me. Like either the work sits there in somebody's, if they buy it. Often my work isn't bought because, like, you know, I don't meet the demands of capitalism so well all the time. So what is my success? It's like the conversation about my work, the success.
Yeah.
But then also, what am I making? What am I making? So then one of the things with art practice is that we're expected, like for the last 100 years, while museums were created, to create work that lasts forever. So now we're like involved with, now we're working with materials that are toxic to the environment, full of forever chemicals that they don't biodegrade. When like after the attention is gone, there's the thing still sitting there, unable to like have an entropic process. You know, so what does that do? Like, how many artists are making things with toxic materials? Like and also like the industrialization of art. So like some of my work I design and then I send it to industrial projects, like my inflatable work. they manufacture it, made with lightweight like nylon materials, but that is never going to, they're going to break, because often they do, because like the way people engage their whole body into the work. But like, it's never going to just like, you put it into somewhere and it's going to like become part of
Yes.
like nature again.
Yes.
So I got very interested in making work that once it's done in the public imagination, it can go back into the ground and not poison it.
And you're doing that.
And I'm doing it.
Because this story was just amazing, that you've got like some birds thinking, hey, this is a little house I can live in. This
Yeah,
is
exactly.
so great.
So like,
It's beautiful.
So the floating body utilizes the technology of floating islands. You plant it with plants in a essentially like a coir substructure with a flotation. The only thing that is there that is not great is the flotation device has to be foam. You can build them naturally with bamboo, but we don't grow big enough bamboo. So I am interested in finding ways of getting it like absolutely, completely like bio-safe. And the one thing, so we have steel but it is a good, at least it's a good foam. It's like SPX 33, which is very stable in the water, and it doesn't release a whole bunch of toxins as it degrades.
Right.
So it's the same foam that they would use in boats and that kind of thing. So it's very stable in the water. And then I wove. I've got the bamboo superstructure holding like the bottom, and then I wove willow around it from that same tree.
Oh, wow.
So then that willow in there is still alive. It's rooting. It's making water roots. So it's still alive because it's in the water.
Oh, my word.
So it's like the mother and the child still together in the thing. And then I'm using dwarf papyrus. There's some bulbinella in there. The herb of grace. Herb of grace, I also just found out, it's a great oxygenator of the water, like a very natural.
So did you know about plants before this?
No.
So you did all of it, and you had to like research all the plants and what they do and
Yes,
whatever.
absolutely. So it's like, it's all, and that is like the learning. Oh my God, it's like, I'm so excited like by the learning and like to understand these natural processes. So the plants in there suck up the water as part of the natural process of like feeding themselves, and through that process they clean the water. They convert the toxins in the water into energy so that they can grow. Yeah, so it's like these, I had to learn all these things. I was very lucky. So I first saw a floating island on Instagram, and I thought, ooh, I like this. And then there was something that made me want to like do one, like they call them floating islands, but I'm working also with my body and the shape of my body and how my body exists and takes up space. So a lot of my work is about how my body, like it's the locus of the attention, how I can like be a part of a space, and also how I can allow people to think differently about my body, a fat body. Growing up in the 80s in this very violent settler colonial state that also like said that there was a certain kind of beauty, that was beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed girls with, this kind of figure, that this is what beauty was. And that as a strong, stocky, athletic person that was perceived as a girl, like I had a constant hypervigilance on my body from my own family, because my body wasn't the same as the girls that I was growing up with.
Right.
I was also like gendered in a way. Like when I grew up, I didn't have a gender, but I like, if I had to think about it, I was a tomboy. I would like, and I honestly, for the longest time, thought of myself as a boy. So, growing up in the space where people are constantly looking, observing, and commenting on your body, that you are not beautiful. I had all my sisters were like models, and they met all these all the expectations of them. They constantly had boyfriends, and they were like encouraged and all of the things. And I was like just like the weird person in their room, like playing sports or drawing. You know, I had my body had no value. So I went from being the strong tomboy with a very firm like connection to my body, and when I was 20, I got run over by a minibus taxi, coming at 90 kilometers an hour.
Ah. Oh my word!
Yeah. So it broke my leg.
Those scars never went away?
They never.
Holes.
Yeah. So there was external fixator, external fracture here, bone. So both the bones broke. You can also see all the connections.
So you must have followed Frida Kahlo.
Yes.
Right.
I think
she went through a lot of trauma as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it also what happened when you experience the body trauma like that. What happened for me, in addition to kind of the gender issues I was feeling, was that this big break cut me off from my body.
Right.
So I developed a gender dysphoria, also a body dysmorphia. So I couldn't see my body. I couldn't feel my body. It was and then eventually building so much inflammation where you completely disconnected. So I existed in my mind, mostly, thinking, but very disconnected from my body. And I think a lot, whether or not you have a big accident, I think a lot of people are very disembodied. This is why we can't remember that we're living creatures. That's why we think of nature outside of ourselves. So a lot of my work had been particularly with my performance work, and all of these are processes. It's not one project. They're all multiple projects that are all part of this understanding that we have to be present in a space, in a time. And if we're not, that's when this alienation from the living world that we are a part of happens. So I think a lot of my work is about trying to remind people that they exist in a time and a space. And
quite a job you've taken over. Just a question. So you said your performance work. Do you mean you did? Was there something else besides the?
Yes. So my work with my body started in 2015. I started doing the performances where I painted myself gold. That's why I'm called Golden Dean. I went out in public naked, painted gold. So I wanted to do something around the fat body, but I knew that people would not be able to accept my pure naked body out in public. So I painted myself gold. Also because of Joburg,
yes,
the city of gold. And I'm I'm such a Joburg person.
Right.
You know?
I know Joburg does that to you.
Yeah, so I started performing. I did my first performance in Braamfontein in a window. I still had this divide. And then there was this thing that happened around this attention. Everybody started filming me on their own phone. So they were mediating their experience and almost like they could only cope through watching it on their phone. And then distributing the stuff. So this is also where the impetus came for this other performance. So the Fuck White People was a performance. It was a very deliberate performance about putting my body into the space and disturbing the space. Then I did it again in Ghana, in Accra, at a street art festival. That was beyond.
What did you do?
I painted myself gold. I got naked. I painted myself gold
In
in Ghana on the Gold Coast.
How did that go down?
I broke the internet. There's this one photograph of me, like photograph from the back. I'm like standing here like this. And there's just a crowd of people standing in front of me, photographing me.
Sure.
So but the thing like that, the interesting thing for me is that when people are looking at you, they forget that they're being seen. So there is a thing that happens as a performance artist when you can boldly look at people who have completely lost their mask and you see the real them. Whether or not, like, most people are just like fascinated. Some people in the crowd are like a little bit of demonic energy. You know, you can see that they're like leering or like sexualizing it. Because also, like, when I do that, it's not about sex.
Yes, of course.
Yes, there's sensuality in that. My body is soft. It's welcoming. But like people, like I have a video, like people like I get naked, I get like into the thing, and then like this crowd just like forms around me and it calls. So my work is so much about the gathering of strangers.
Right. Oh wow.
So my putting myself like somewhat at risk. Like the thing is that when you do so vulnerable in public, people come out of the crowd to protect you. And that is like such a relief.
That's amazing.
You know, it's like the more you risk yourself, the greater like connection you have, not only to your own humanity, but to waking the humanity of others to stand with you. So that a lot of my work is about trying to find those co-conspirators. Because I realized that with my weak body, my body that is disabled, I need people around me. And I would say that despite all of the trauma that I went through as a child, all these things, I have accessed extraordinary assistance. Like as a kid, I went to a children's home that educated me. They made me feel safe. They gave me the therapy that I needed. Then they put me through university. They gave me the basis. Then I went to university. Then I got an internship into the Mail and Guardian, where all these people like taught me what it means to first of all be a South African, to be a human. I would go out and document people's lives. People would just welcome you in, like into the worst moments of their life. The humanity, like, you know, when we talk about like humanity as if like it's something different, like to but have you ever seen the way that animals behave, the way that animals protect each other? You don't see like yes, they have their like social quirks, their social things, but like these are the things like when as humans, when we remember that, when we're reminded that we're animals, all living, sharing the same earth. Like I would say that 500 years of colonialism had created a massive wound.
Completely.
Yeah. So a lot of my work is trying to find the repair and the narrative repair. Like how we tell stories, who we lift up. Because so many, like the idols of this age are the people who would be like considered like the royalty or the ruling class. And these are not the people, like the most ordinary people, like the people that like, in 2000, I covered the Mozambique floods.
Sure.
I went.
None of us can forget that flood.
We can't forget that flood. The woman that had the baby in the tree.
Yes.
You know, another thing, like, so also like another thing, like just connected again to Mozambique, where I also like made my break with the kind of like the Rainbow Nation thing was covering the xenophobia violence in 2008, it broke me. Another like an episode of my PTSD. It like disconnected, another thing that like disconnected me from people and made me like mistrust the slaughter of people, like watching what South Africans and what nationalism had done to say that these people that look exactly like everybody else here are somehow the foreigners and not the white settler colonialists. Like it's just,
no, and it's happening again, right? Because of all the I think it's so this whole thing of Home Affairs and police going and checking every spaza shop and looking at every product they know nothing about, and being so, I think so xenophobic. I'm sorry, it's very disappointing. But I was smiling earlier when you were talking about really serious things about connections and the people that you felt supported. And I was thinking the similarities. So even in the work that I do, what we're trying to do is build networks, is to build the activism on the ground, is to build, it's those connections that get me up in the day that is so important, and that kind of being supported, because you can never be an island on your own. You have to build those, and that's so you was talking about things, and it's how we, sometimes as South Africans, we see a glass half full, half empty. And it's the kind of Ubuntu that's in us, and it's not a theoretical thing that we support people. And that we'll help people and we'll protect when we need to protect. And yes, of course, there's this other side that evil side that you sneer at, and there is that part of society. And I think the better part of our work, and is building on the good. So it's even, I mean, sometimes in activism, I get people saying horrible things, like, you're useless, you can't change anything, you can't, I'm like, eek, sorry. But there are lots of people who make me so happy or smiley or whatever, where their own kind of energy, their own ability to protect everything that you're saying is so big in them. It's hard to describe, There's a woman that comes to mind. She's in Carolina. She's just this most awesome, generous activist. She doesn't keep knowledge to herself. She shares it. She shares the connections, and that's not usually the case. People want to keep it because they want the funding, and she's just been amazing. So it was that I was smiling at, and there was something else you said. There was so much you said, and I was like, oh, that's so similar to the kind of activism. So the linkage in terms of what we're doing is the support, it's the networking, is building those groups. And then you get the ugly side that we fight against every single day, and that can bring you down.
Yeah, I think part of the creative work, and that's why I insist on like a lot of the work that I do is like kind of workshop processes about reminding people that they're creative. Could you can, if you're an activist, you're on the front line all the time. That of course you're going to be infected. Of course you're going to be like sullied by the shadow of capitalism constantly, of selfishness,
of privilege. I get these calls and they bang the phone down on me like, oh, oops. It's very privileged people that then would so all of that.
Also like philanthropy comes in, like it's also like all of these processes are there very deliberately to make the work of change harder. Like to make it unsafe for people, to make people fear losing like their comfortable lives. But the thing is that like we can all like stand to lose a little bit of comfort in order for a lot of other people to gain a lot more stability and security. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this brings me to the other story that you're talking about in what made you and growing up and understanding who you are and being the other or the different person. And I remember, you use the word tomboy, and I think every child was like, if you were tomboy and you accepted it as, okay, cool, that's who I am. And till today, I hate dresses. It's just not something I do. But I remember when that changed for me in terms of identity. So the identity of growing up in the 80s of being Indian, Muslim, female, and fitting into blocks, and fitting into what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. All of those kind of constraints that society puts on you. So yes, I was a tomboy, and my parents were awesome. So they didn't care one way or another. These are my kids, and do whatever you want to. And from an early age, my mom never forced dresses on us. She knew we couldn't do it, so she was like, cool. And we grew up different to my cousins and all of that. But what is interesting is the politics of the 80s and my mind of, if you're female, you have no voice and you have no say in society. It's, the men have the rights, and I grew up in an Indian Muslim community, which men have lots of rights, led me to my feminism. And I'm going to be a woman, and I'm going to tell you that I'm going to be strong, and I'm going to do what I want. And that has molded my activism, is that fighting that very patriarchal society. And it still exists. It still exists, but I wonder if we're losing the idea of what feminism is. Because it should be more than that. It should be a much bigger kind of gender identity that we're having right now. But I still feel that patriarchy, it's so hard. Every advert, every bulletin makes you feel like, I don't see that. That's not who I am. So something's wrong with you. And you think about social media, like the struggles now that young people have. And it's no wonder that there's high levels of suicide, depression. But I also love, so that like half full, half empty, is the amazing activism and the creative ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm working with we're a little bit anonymous, but I'm working with a group of, there's also one thing about this last year of extreme trauma that we have experienced because of the ongoing genocide in Palestine. But there's all this pain every day, I wake up, and that's often the first stuff I'm engaging with. Some escalation of the inhumanity of Israeli apartheid, another hospital bombed, more children shredded. I start my day often in tears.
I can't anymore.
Yeah.
It's true. Sorry,
yeah.
I cut in.
No, I also so what I try to do is shed the tears. I cry.
Okay.
I let go of the emotion and shift to action.
I've tried that. This is the one thing. It sounds so. We're sitting in this beautiful place, and there are people just being mowed down, and I had the same thing. So my family celebrates Eid, right? And I remember going onto Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever that person wants to call it, and there were these kids in a concentration camp. I'm calling it concentration camp.
It's definitely a concentration camp.
And this young boy sitting, whatever, and the camera person saying, "So, what did you do for Eid when you were with your family?" It wasn't. It was like, "So it's Eid, and what do you do when it's Eid?" And he was saying, "This is what we did as a family, and then we'd have lunch, we'd eat together, and they'd say, 'What's your favorite food?'" And he was, giving the whole spiel, and then they said, "So what are you going to do this Eid?" And he just looked down and he says, "I don't know." And the guy said, "Where's your family?" Every single person in his family was gone.
No, how can you not cry? How can you not feel it? It's horrendous. It's horrendous. This is the context in which we exist. You know, we cannot forget those children. James Baldwin said, every child is our child. My child cried for those children. You know,
It's terrible. And just going to have family lunch, eat with my family, I had to just appreciate where we are. And so even in South Africa, we can talk about our shitty water and our lights and our whatever and our roads. But we still can build. We still have so much that we can build. And, you know, maybe at this point we should take a walk at the river.
I think so.